one argument that the Polish government and maybe Donald Tusk himself could be used is that unless EU does something with the ETS, it could sway potentially next year's election. And if that happens, then in less than 2 years, it will not be Donald Tusk, but Przemysław Czarnek sitting in the council in Brussels.
So why is it exploding politically right now?
I think the biggest answer is when you look at the graph of the prices of the ETS. For many, many years, the price has floated at a very low level. Around 2018, couple of things started to happen that led to the price increase. Now it's trading at around 70 euros, so 10 times as much as just below a decade ago. The Supreme Audit's Office has found that it can only confirm 1.3% of the money being directly spent on lowering emissions.
So when Czarnek and PiS are out there calling the ETS a Brussels ATM, are they correct? Because Poland has literally been using it as its national ATM, right?
Well, yes and no.
Precz z ETS-em, precz z tym brukselskim szwindlem.
Away with the ETS, away with this Brussels swindle. Poland can no longer be ATM for the EU's climate policy. That was Przemysław Czarnek. He's a leading figure in Poland's main opposition party, the Conservative Law and Justice, and recently the party has named him its candidate for the prime minister in the next year's election. Since then, he has been attacking one policy in particular, the EU's emissions trading system, or the ETS. It's a system that has been in place for over 20 years, but one that many Poles have barely heard about. And yet, it quietly shapes every electricity bill in the country, a country that emits a lot. So, in this episode of the Warsaw Wire, we will try to answer one main question. Is the ETS really as damaging to Polish households and businesses as the right-wing claim? I'm Alicja Ptak, a deputy editor-in-chief at Notes from Poland, and to find out, I called up Patryk Strzałkowski. He's a Polish energy reporter, and he's been digging into this for the NFP. Patryk, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into the politics, can you just tell me, what actually is the ETS? Because I think that for a lot of our listeners, this is one of these acronyms that floats around a lot and nobody really explains it.
Yeah, I think you've made a very good point about the ETS only now being more and more in the public knowledge in Poland. Basically, the ETS is a system that allows the EU to put a price on the carbon emissions to discourage companies from emitting the greenhouse gases that, as we know, hurt the climate and cause the warming of the climate that we are observing, especially in the recent years.
So how does it work exactly?
So the ETS is quite often branded as a carbon tax, but the main premise of the mechanism actually is that it is not a tax. A tax would be a fixed rate, let's say 10 euros per each ton of carbon emitted. And this is not how the mechanism works. Instead, there is a yearly fixed amount of allowances that the companies like energy utilities have to buy in order to be allowed to emit CO2 into the atmosphere. That number each year is decreasing within the EU and within specific countries. So that makes the price rise, especially if countries or companies do not reduce their emissions, because there is, if there is as much carbon emission as there was throughout the years, but the number of allowances decreases, that raises the price. And year by year, the polluting becomes less and less economically feasible for such companies.
As far as I understand, Poland was already in the system from its conception, right?
Yes, exactly. Poland, just to remind the listeners, Poland joined the EU in 2004 and the ETS was started in 2005. So we had we had not very much time before the system actually kicked off, but obviously it has been established years before that. So when Poland joined the EU, when we signed the treaties, we knew that ETS is part of the system that we are signing up to joining the EU.
So why is it exploding politically right now?
I think the biggest answer is when you look at the graph of the prices of the ETS. For many, many years, until basically 2018, the price has floated at a very low level from today's perspective, because that was around 7-8 euros per ton of emissions. And that is something that you would never notice on your electricity bill or other ways that in other sectors that are within the ETS, like steel or cement, because that is just not a very big amount per 1 ton of carbon emissions. But around 2018, couple of things started to happen that led to the price increase. Now it's trading at around 70 euros, so 10 times as much as just below a decade ago. And that is the main factor that has led to it becoming more of a topic, because with the price rise, we see the effects on electricity bills and affecting the ETS, affecting other sectors as well.
And why have the prices increased over the past decade? Is it because, as you said, there are fewer and fewer allowances, so their market value has skyrocketed? Is it that, or are there some other factors?
So yes, that was the main factor. So at the beginning, there was a lot of also free allowances and just a lot of allowances that companies could buy and trade. But as there is less and less of them, basically the price rises. Two other factor is that the system is designed in a way that that companies reduce emissions where it makes more financial sense. So the emissions that have been reduced were the easiest one. Now we get to harder and harder sectors like steel or cement, where the technology is not that advanced. It's harder to reduce the emissions. So that makes the price of carbon rise as well. And the other factor, I would say, is the boom on climate policy that we have seen in 2018, 19, 20, the Green New Deal, because as I mentioned before, not just companies, but also financial institutions are allowed to trade the emission allowances, to buy them. And they could have been buying them in anticipation of the price getting higher, because we know that the emission targets are getting more and more strict. So they could be anticipating the price rising and just buying more and more of these allowances to trade them at the higher price.
So basically, the financial institutions are also kind of gambling on the ETS prices, right?
In a way, yes. So it operates as a market, not an unregulated one. Of course, there are regulations and mechanisms that are within the ETS, but yes, they can buy the allowances, like financial institutions, or also utilities. They can buy them for profit, or, for example, to hedge for a big electricity company in Poland. If they anticipate that the price of ETS will rise, for example, in the next years, they can try to buy as much allowances now, so they basically don't pay later when the price rises. So yes, they can in a way speculate on the emissions. That has been a point of criticism from some politicians in Poland, and not just in Poland, actually.
So I want to make sure that I understand the mechanism here correctly. The companies are paying for these permits, right? And where does the money go?
So here we have to get a bit deeper into the workings EUDS, which is quite a complicated mechanism. And maybe that's one of the reasons it hasn't been very much in the public attention, because you have to do a lot of research to understand how it works. But basically, there's the primary market. So this is the mechanism that I mentioned before. Well, not by name, but this is the place where companies like utility in Poland producing electricity with coal plants, they go to the primary market to buy allowances. And when they buy them on that primary market, they do it through auctions. and the money goes to the EU member states, with a small part going to the EU budgets into specific funds that are later supposed to help with decarbonization. Then there is also the secondary market, and that happens when a company, either a utility, an emitter, or a financial institutions, as mentioned, has bought the allowances and wants to sell them later. This is another place to go for a company looking to buy the allowances.
And the money from the primary market, once it goes to the different funds, what is done with this money?
Right now, the EU law states that all of this has to go towards reducing emission. A couple of years ago, that threshold was 50% of the funds that had to be spent by member states on on reducing emission, on decarbonization. And that is the requirement, but it has not always been the case in reality, actually.
And how did the Poland do on that front?
Well, not great, according to the Supreme Audit's Office, which is an office in Poland that, well, as the name says, audits the various branches of the government independently. It has done an extensive report on the ETS funds in Poland until 2023, and it has found that it can only confirm 1.3% of the money being directly spent on lowering emissions. Almost 99% has been sort of a creative accounting by the government.
And if I understand correctly, the government just used this money for other purposes. So when Czarnek and PiS are out there calling the ETS a Brussels ATM, are they correct? Because Poland has literally been using it as its national ATM, right?
Well, yes and no. This is actually where things get even more complicated. But to the yes part, absolutely, Polish budgets has benefited from the ETS, has gained tens of billions of euros over the years of budgetary income from the system. And actually, researching the story for Notes from Poland, I came across governmental website from 2020. So when Czarnek was in office, when the Law and Justice government was in office, and there was a whole article on the website of the PiS-run Climate Ministry saying about the benefits of the EU ETS system for Poland. And the Law and Justice government themselves, just 6 years ago, said that Poland received income from the sales of greenhouse gas allowances, and added with the rising prices, it will gather even more revenue. So just a couple of years ago, they were themselves admitting that, yes, we do receive billions of euros from the system. Well, the budget does receive billions of euros from the system, but there is another part, the so-called ETS gap, that some politicians on the right have been raising for a few years.
What is it?
So this is, as I mentioned, the amount of allowances that EU member states get each year is decreasing. And the idea is that you keep up the pace, or you outpace that with reducing your emissions. That was not the case with Poland's emissions that have been kind of flat for the last 15 to 20 years. But the number of allowances is dropping year by year. That means that at this point, Poland and some other countries, actually like Germany, need to buy more allowances that we are given at the auctions. So the companies have to go either to other EU member states or to the secondary markets to get the allowances. And because the emissions have not been dropping nearly fast enough, that means that more and more of the ETS money is being spent abroad. So this is the money that is leaking not really to Brussels, because the EU budget doesn't get a big part of the ETS, but to other EU countries, not Germany, because as I mentioned, they also have ETS gap, but countries that have decarbonized, like France or Denmark or Portugal, they now have extra allowances basically to trade, and they profit from that.
Why does Poland have this gap?
So Poland, well, if you would listen to the politicians from right to center right, actually most of the politicians, they would say that this is the legacy of the communist systems that we had, that was relying a lot on heavy industry, on the coal that Poland does have domestically and has been using it to produce electricity for many decades. But the truth is as well that, as you asked me in the beginning of the interview, we already joined the EU knowing that ETS is there, that climate policy is there, and that we do need to decarbonize. That has not happened on the scale that was needed. Some of the changes were delayed by successive governments who were either discouraged to make hard decisions regarding some powerful coal miners' unions, especially in the Polish Silesia region. There was also the case of the Law and Justice government blocking development of onshore wind farms. And now we are left with still quite a lot of coal in our energy mix. Well, quite a lot. The biggest share among the EU member states. That leads to very high emissions, and therefore we have to buy a lot of allowances from the ETS.
What does the ETS actually add to a Polish electricity bill?
So this is a bit of a complicated question. I feel like I'm repeating this, but just maybe to underscore the last time that there is a lot of aspect to the ETS. It's complicated for some of the reasons that I did mention before. So we can, for example, look at the average price of the allowances for 1 year. Last year, I think that was around 73 or 75 euros. But as I did mention, some utilities, if they wanted to, they could have bought them when the prices of ETS were lower. So we do not know exactly. I mean, we can calculate for specific utility, but then we'd need to look at specific timing and so on. With some assumption, we can basically say that the ETS adds around 15 to 16% to a typical electricity bill for a Polish household in the last couple of years.
So this is the existing ETS, but there is a second one coming, right?
Yes, and this has been a topic of controversy even before the debate has kicked off really on the ETS this year. Some politicians have been raising the question of ETS, the so-called ETS2. And I think it can become even more of a politically hot topic because this is the system that will affect consumers and households way more directly. As I mentioned before, the existing ETS is limited to some of the biggest emitters, like in industry scale electricity generation, big scale heat generation, or production of cement, steel, and also to some extent aviation and maritime shipping. The ETS2, however, will put a price of carbon on transportation and building sector. So the fuel that we buy to heat our home or to put in the tank. That will be obviously much more directly felt by all EU citizens, but not equally throughout various countries.
And when it kicks in?
The initial date was supposed to be 2027, so just next year. The EU has already delayed that to 2028, just 1 year, but that point was quite important for the Polish government because they are facing election in 2027. So the last thing they wanted was for the system to enter into force in an election year. But the Polish Climate Ministry is saying that that is not enough for Poland to prepare for the new system and that they want to postpone it to at least 2030.
And why is Poland particularly vulnerable to the ETS too?
In general terms, you could say that Poland is still not being among the countries with the highest income. People still pay a big share of their expenses on energy. So the ETS that will directly affect all forms of energy, not just electricity like the ETS1, but as well heating and transportation, will be felt more by the general population. But Poland is particularly bad placed for it because of the house heating sector. We have more coal furnaces than not just any other country, but basically almost all the homes that are still heated with coal in the EU are within Poland. There's a small number of people in Ireland, for example, using coal for heating, but basically throughout the EU, it's been a thing of the past. In Poland, it's still a couple of millions of households that use coal, and because that is the dirtiest fuel with the highest CO2, it will have the highest price with the ETS too, one that could be an extreme burden for people who use that fuel to heat their houses.
So, what can be realistically done? Let's say you're in Warsaw, you're in government, you're going to Brussels. What's on the table?
Maybe let me start with what's not really on the table, because we've been hearing, as you said, some politicians on the right, like Przemysław Czarnek, saying that the ETS should be dismantled or that Poland should leave the system. Neither is an option. Dismantling the ETS would require a majority of the EU countries, and there is simply no such majority on the horizon, because most of the countries have already decarbonized to a larger extent, so they are not really encouraged to get rid of the system. They also get revenue from the ETS, some money from countries like Poland that face the ETS gap that we talked about. So they are not really encouraged to get rid of the system. And even if somehow Poland tried to unilaterally exit the system, which is not really legal, but if somehow we did it, or even on the extreme scale, if Poland left the EU, that would still not mean that we are free from the ETS, because our companies want to operate on the European market, and they would have to adjust to European rules, even if you weren't members of the EU. So there is basically no realistic option to get rid of the ETS. What is politically, I think, possible right now is some adjustments that will take under the considerations a couple of things. One of them, specific position of countries like Poland that as we said, a lot of coal use, not just in the electricity generation, but also in homes. And the other thing is some difficulties in decarbonizing. Like the first ETS system, that's sometimes called the big one, is used in electricity, but also in steel and cement. And the latter sectors, they have proven harder to decarbonize than some people hoped. So more leeway for such companies or more financial supports for them is what Polish government, among others, is proposing and trying to get in negotiations in the next months.
Right now, hearing Przemysław Czarnek saying away from with the ETS, I had a slight flashback, because not so long ago, a year ago, Karol Nawrocki, who was campaigning to become a Polish president, was suggesting that as soon as he takes office, we should have a referendum on leaving ETS. And it has been 8 months since he came to the office, and we haven't really heard a lot about the referendum. Quite the opposite, because he proposed a bill to lower energy prices, and part of that bill was an idea to use an ETS fund to help reduce electricity bills. So I wonder on Czarnek, how much these are just campaign slogans, and how much is it an actual policy that they will try to implement once and if they come back to power?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and not an easy one, because I think on the surface it would be easy to say, especially on the example of Karol Nawrocki that you mentioned, that these are just campaign slogans, and once in power, or if in power, the Law and Justice would not go through with this. Another good example or argument to support this is that Law and Justice was in power for 8 years, and some among their politicians have been raising the question of ETS throughout these years, and they haven't really done anything. In fact, they did less to change the ETS than the current government, that instead of such rhetorics, trade negotiations, and achieving some sort of change, some degree of change within the EU in that way.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the government and the Prime Minister Donald Tusk actually wants right now? Because they are the ones who are negotiating with Brussels, right?
Yeah, right. So for over a year now, the government has been mainly raising the issue of ETS2 because, as I mentioned, the issue of impact of the system on household, on consumers, that could be significant if the price of ETS2 rises as quickly as some predictions would have it. So this is the thing that have been negotiating for the over last year, over a year. And now somehow that momentum has shifted to the ETS as a whole, and they are trying to propose amendment to both. Basically, with the ETS2, they want basically a delay because that is what they view as the best option to allow Poland to prepare for the enter of the ETS2. Or if that doesn't succeed, another option would be a cap on the price of the ETS2, which would limit the impact on households. On the ETS1, the existing systems, they want some more support for the sectors that we mentioned that are difficult to decarbonize, like cement, steel, or district heating. That is also another big thing in Poland that is not existing in very many EU countries. Basically, big coal plants that their main job is to provide heating for towns and cities. This is what they're trying to achieve. We'll see, I think, in the next months how the negotiations are going. The EU Commission is supposed to present their proposed amendment to the ETS this summer. I think one argument that the Polish government and maybe Donald Tusk himself could be using, or I can very much imagine him using, is that unless EU does something with the ETS, something to quell these critical voices from the right, it could sway potentially next year's election. And if that happens, then in less than 2 years, it will not be Donald Tusk, but Przemysław Czarnek sitting in the council in Brussels. And I guess this may be a strong argument for some EU leaders to do something about that.
So do you think that the threat of more radical right-wing politicians sitting in Warsaw would be enough to convince the European Commission to further postpone these changes?
Well, that's a very good question that I do not feel I am really qualified to ask. I can imagine the Polish side making this argument, but then, as you know, there is various interests and actors at play, because it's not just to the Commission but also to other member states to agree to such proposals. So I quite possibly the Commission would not want another right-wing government in Poland with the experiences that they had with the previous one, with the rule of law. But maybe coming back to some of the points that we made earlier, there's other interests like the countries who want the ETS to be there either for the budgetary income or for the climate commitments that they want to fulfill. So they might not really want to step back on that, just in the hopes that it will somehow prevent the far right from getting power in Poland.
And this makes me think of another question that I wanted to ask you. Seeing this rhetoric around ETS, which, as we already established, has been quite obscure policy that hasn't been in the headlines for many, many years. I wonder how much this debate is an actual debate on the climate policy and how much is it a proxy debate on European Union?
Well, that's a very good question, and to a large extent, I think I agree with that, and I will get to the to a side point in a minute. But basically, yes, I think They have been trying to raise the issue of ETS before. Now it's gaining more tractions. I think also because people are now just way more aware of the energy prices, electricity bills, because of the energy crisis of the 2022 and another potential one this year. So this is something that more and more people have been understanding and hearing about how various factors affect the prices we pay for electricity or for gas or for heating. But of course, it's not the ETS is absolutely not a central issue to Polish economy. It's not like everything has been going wrong with the Polish economy because of the ETS. Actually, the Polish economy is doing quite well despite the ETS. So it's definitely not a central issue. I think what I have seen in the last couple of elections over the last 12 years that I work in the media is the far right parties or the right wing, the Law and Justice. They really, in the campaign and before the campaign, they try out many things. I've seen this happen with the issue of refugees in 2015, then of the LGBTQ plus rights in some local elections in Poland. So they basically try out issues and see what sticks, see what helps them in the polls. And I think that climate policy and the EU is one of the things that they are trying now. If it sticks, if this is the thing that gets the voters to be angry about and to support them. And I think it very much depends on the success or lack of thereof if they actually stick with this topic through the rest of the campaign. So it remains to be seen if people actually do care so much about the ETS. I think it's not so easy because, as we have mentioned multiple times throughout this conversation, it's a quite difficult system. And of course, it's possible to just use misinformations or simplify it to make it sound like something that's affecting us very, very much when in fact it's not. But then, for example, if people see their electricity bills not rising or maybe falling due to other factors that maybe they will not really buy that much into this, then still electricity, well, for some people, some households, the electricity can be quite burdensome. But there's a lot of people, for especially those living in blocks of flats like myself, where actually the electricity use is not that much of a concern because just in a small apartment, the bill, the 15% increase is not that much money. So various factors here. And one point that I wanted to make to counter this actually is the ETS2, because this is where real effects in the society can happen. This is a topic that I have seen also within the current government. People quite strongly oppose not just the specifics, but the idea itself. Because it's even though it's called ETS2 and the premise is the cell, there is a very big difference, a principal difference between ETS1 and 2. And that is, I think, an actual debate on the climate policy. But that is, of course, happening more within the experts and some governmental circles and not on political rallies.
Fascinating. So when you zoom out all the way, what are you watching for right now?
So one thing I'd be watching for, it's, as I mentioned, the next speeches and the campaign trail. Well, it's not officially campaign, but maybe within this political reality, it's always a campaign. And then just to watch out for what not just Przemysław Czarnek, but also other politicians say, and how often do they mention the ETS or climate policy, because this will tell us by proxy if what their polling suggests is this topic working with the voters or not. If they keep pushing this message, then I imagine that shows us that, yes, people actually do care about it according to the pollings that they are internally making for themselves. And if they move to other topics, then perhaps it will turn out that this is not something that has caught on the public's attention as much as they hoped for. And this is on the political spectrum. or the politics. And on the policy spectrum, then the next few months will be, I imagine, heated discussions between Poland and other countries on what will and what will not be in this package that the Commission is supposed to show in the summer in the review of the ETS directive. So there is actually a lot of things that can be changed on technical level or more fundamental level. So the leaks that we might hear from the negotiations in the next months, and then the propositions themselves, that will be, of course, what will actually shape this policy. The elections that we have in Poland, the parliamentary elections, are over a year and a half away. So it will very much still be this government that has a vote in Brussels on this reform on the ETS, and the next government, whoever it is, will basically inherit the situations. So as much as the rhetoric might affect the campaign and the election result, what happens with the ETS and the Polish vote is up to the Donald Tusk's government and his ministers. So watch out what they keep saying in the next months in interviews or media leaks that we will for sure see.
Patryk Strzałkowski, energy reporter, thanks for coming to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks. Pleasure to dig into the ETS. Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners. If you like this episode, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And see you next time.